that ASHRAE has to share with the world. I'm going to start the presentation because it's quite lengthy. It's a bit involved, but I want to give enough time for everybody to ask their questions. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Oh, can you see it? Right. All right, great. All right, welcome everybody. The presentation is called Air Conditioning and COVID-19, the facts. These are the facts that are presented by ASHRAE. We represent the ASHRAE Caricom Chapter. We have a resource of ASHRAE International to assist us with advising our clients and peers within the built environment. ASHRAE has the mission of serving humanity by advancing the arts of science and sciences of heating, ventilation, air conditioning, refrigeration, and their allied fields. And when we say allied fields, anybody who's involved in the built environment. So very much like TTIFMA, anybody is welcome to join ASHRAE once you have some sort of affiliation with the built environment and that industry. We'll jump straight into it with a little bit of timeline behind the COVID issue that we're seeing now. Between January and March 2020, the WHO worked with the Chinese authorities and various European authorities to contain and limit the spread of the novel coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, which causes the disease COVID-19. And in March 2020, they declared it to be a pandemic. The general consensus of the main mode of transmission of the virus is through respiratory droplets generated by infected persons. Now, that is key when you consider that a droplet's travel range is limited to about 6 feet, which sort of shaped the guidelines on the physical distancing and the use of masks. And airborne transmission was not considered to be a major vector of the virus. Now, bear in mind that it's a new virus. We have very limited knowledge about it. So a lot of research has not been done. They were basing their assumptions on previous coronaviruses. But there were some early studies that seemed to indicate that under certain conditions, the virus could become aerosolized and airborne. And in early July, 239 scientists petitioned WHO to revise its position on the potential for airborne transmission, and they did so. They didn't commit fully to it, but they stated that you cannot rule it out under certain circumstances. So crowded and poorly ventilated areas may result in the virus being transmitted via airborne vectors. So one of those early studies was done in China on a 3-family cluster at a restaurant. Some of you may have seen this on the web. But they concluded that the virus particles appeared to be sufficiently small to be able to move with the air currents produced by a wall-mounted air conditioning unit. And though this does not represent a true airborne transmission, it highlighted the possibility of a virus transmission via airborne droplets in an indoor air-conditioned space. Now, a lot of our work environments use mini splits or air conditioning of some sort. So that is why ASHRAE felt the need to take the lead in shaping the discussion regarding air conditioning and the potential for virus transmission. So this is a little diagram of the study that was produced by the study. It demonstrates that the initial carrier was centrally located between the 2 tables where other infected persons were. You'll note, however, that the tables immediately adjacent to them didn't result in anybody being infected. However, those in the direct path of the air conditioning unit, supply and return, were the ones that were infected. And it was among the first to postulate that the virus was capable of being transported by air currents beyond the proposed safe 6-foot distance. They didn't quite state that it was an airborne virus. I said ASHRAE felt the need to respond to the issues surrounding air conditioning in relation to the pandemic. And the President released a statement on the ASHRAE website. In light of the current global pandemic, it's critically important that ASHRAE responds with the guidance on mitigating the transmission of the virus, as well as ventilation and filtration recommendations. ASHRAE has a significant role to play in ensuring safe and healthy building environments, and these statements offer the expert strategies needed at this time. We will go into greater detail in this presentation on what they are. As I indicated, there were a lot of mistruths and false statements surrounding air conditioning systems, where people are actually suggesting you should turn them off as the safe way to deal with the virus or the risk of the virus spreading in an air conditioning environment. So ASHRAE published two statements to define the guidance on air conditioning systems in the management of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. The first was released in April, notably well before World Health Organization was willing to admit that there may be a potential for airborne transmission. And the statement read that the transmission of SARS-CoV-2 through the air is sufficiently likely that airborne exposure to the virus should be controlled. Changes to building operations, including the operation of heating, ventilating, and air conditioning systems, can reduce airborne exposures. The second statement in support of that was that the ventilation and filtration provided by heating, ventilating, and air conditioning systems can reduce the airborne concentration of SARS-CoV-2, and thus the risk of transmission through the air. Unconditioned spaces can cause thermal stress to people that may be directly life-threatening, and that may also lower resistance to infection. In general, disabling of heating, ventilating, and air conditioning systems is not a recommended measure to reduce the transmission of the virus. HVAC filters, along with other strategies, help to reduce the virus transmission by removing other air contaminants that may have health effects. And beyond simply producing statements, ASHRAE formed an ASHRAE epidemic task force, who comprises industry professionals and is advised by experts in medicine and public health. So they are consultants to the task force. And ASHRAE, more importantly, has launched a COVID-19 website that serves as an online resource to address COVID-19 concerns. Free webinars on building reopening and establishing guidelines for building operators during the pandemic. This is a resource I would encourage all of your members to tap into. It's a free resource. You don't need to be a member to sign up, but I would encourage you to consider signing up with ASHRAE because you'll have access to a lot more material as well. This is the website address. Giselle has this presentation, so she can share that with you. But I'll just give you a brief overview of what that website looks like.
Just take out the phrase.
Edward, are you seeing this screen with the website on it? You're muted, so I'm assuming
yeah,
that's a yes.
I can see the screen, yes.
Okay.
Absolutely, with the website, yes, for sure.
So this is the ASHRAE COVID-19 response website that I was just directing you to.
Mm-hmm.
It has the main page with the ASHRAE statements on it and some position papers. It has guidelines on reopening buildings, different types of buildings, schools, universities, advice on energy recovery, and other guidance from other sectors. It goes down into specific buildings like healthcare, residential, multifamily, commercial, schools and universities, advice on filtration and disinfection, transportation, and a myriad of other resources that you can tap into. And again, this is available simply by going to the ASHRAE website and searching for COVID-19. You don't need to be a member to access this.
Right.
So on that website, there's a guideline document that you can access, which is a guideline for building operators. And so the information that's contained in this presentation from here on in is directly from ASHRAE's guidance. Obviously, you want to implement all the non-HVAC related protocols, physical distancing, etc. There's only so much an air conditioning system can do. So if you go into a building and you don't observe the protocols that are enforced by your local authorities, you're increasing the risk for yourself and others. But there are a number of HVAC related adjustments that they recommend that you can consider in conjunction with an HVAC professional. That may be your consulting engineer, it may be your air conditioning supplier, or other professionals that you rely on for advice. So they are in order. Increase the outdoor intake up to 100% outdoor air if feasible. Obviously in the Caribbean that's not feasible, but in a temperate climate at certain times of the year, you may be able to do that without penalty. Improve the central air filtration to MERV 13 and seal the edges to prevent bypass. Disable demand control ventilation. Consider running systems 24/7 to increase impact of the above recommendations. Consider installing portable HEPA filters, and consider ultraviolet germicidal irradiation. As I mentioned, it's important that you consult your HVAC professional before making these adjustments, because they may result in diminished system performance and or reduce operational efficiency. Don't take comfort in the fact that you may have two identical buildings. No two buildings or systems are identical. A system may be not working as effectively in one building as it is in the other. The usage may be different in one building as compared to an identical building. So you need to understand the impact of the changes on the functionality. And the guidelines also assume that your system is in compliance with ASHRAE Standard 62.1 2019, which is ventilation for acceptable indoor air quality. That's the basis for the start of the recommendations. So if we go through the recommendations one by one in greater detail, I'll give you the pros and cons and recommendations for each of the guidelines. Increasing outdoor air intake up to 100% outdoor air if feasible. The pros is that the increased outdoor air intake with reduced building population will increase the effective dilution ventilation per person. So normally you want to be looking at 15 cubic feet per minute per person. You may increase that to 20 cubic feet per person or more if you have increased your outdoor air and reduced your occupancy levels. 100% outdoor air intake, if feasible, will eliminate recirculation. Obviously, all the air is coming in from outside and any contaminants are being taken straight outside. The con on that recommendation is that you may increase your humidity levels in the building, which will result in thermal discomfort for occupants. And in areas where heavy pollution, this may impact the indoor air quality. So if you're in downtown Port of Spain, you may not want to be pulling in all your air straight off Independence Square, because during heavy traffic hours, you are likely to be entraining more than simply fresh air. So in accepting the recommendations, you want to consider your HVAC professional to determine the maximum outdoor air intake rate that can be accommodated without impacting your system. So air conditioning systems are designed for a certain amount of moist or latent load, which humans and outdoor air will produce. And if they exceed that, you tend to have a rise in humidity levels. You may want to consider the installation of energy recovery ventilators. These units will exhaust areas like bathrooms and lunchrooms where you are producing odors, exchange energy with the air that you're bringing in, and reduce the impact of increasing your ventilation on the system. Consider the installation of humidity control systems. ASHRAE recommends maintain your relative humidity between 40% and 60%. It has been shown that numerous viruses and bacteria and molds do not do well in the 40 to 60% range in terms of replication. Below 40%, what tends to happen is that the droplets that are produced when you're speaking or coughing evaporate very quickly and become droplet nuclei that are very easily transported on air currents, and so they tend to spread further. Above 60%, obviously you're getting into the high humidity range and you're propagating the growth of mold and bacteria and virus. So you want to maintain your control over your humidity. You want to consider dedicated outdoor air systems where you have to bring in large volumes of air. These will treat the air before it comes in, filter it, and supply tempered air to your system so you're not impacting your building heat load. And these are a couple of humidity control devices that you can look at. These are duct heaters. And this is a thermostat which also records humidity levels. Improving your central air filtration to MERV 13 and sealing the edges to prevent bypass. Increasing your filter efficiency will reduce the circulation of contaminants in the space. The standard for air conditioning or air handling units is between MERV 8 and 11. They're obviously a lower efficiency and they trap larger particles than a MERV 13 filter will. A lot of filters are supplied aftermarket, so they don't necessarily fit exactly into the air handling unit. So you tend to get gaps between them or around the edges. So you want to seal the edges of the filters to prevent unfiltered air bypassing them and re-entering the space. And research has demonstrated a correlation between increased ventilation rates and filter efficiency. So if you're increasing your ventilation rate, you're obviously exhausting more air. So less contaminated air is passing through the filter. They last longer, they are more effective if you do both. The cons of increasing the efficiency of your filter is that you're increasing the static pressure in your blower, which may reduce the total airflow and result in thermal discomfort for the occupants. If the air volume is not as high, you tend to have pockets of heat or persons feeling a bit uncomfortable because they don't feel the air moving over them. You get increased energy consumption to overcome the increased static pressure drop. And your filter rack may actually be limited in terms of the maximum efficiency rating of the filter that can be accommodated. So again, consult your professional, advise on the filter options, and also consider increasing your filter maintenance regimen. If you are typically changing your filters once every 2 months or once every 3 months, you may want to increase that to once a month, just to make sure that you are removing the contaminants from the space and not negatively impacting your system. And these are just samples of different HEPA filters that you can get. Disabling demand control ventilation. Demand control ventilation is typically employed to generate energy efficiency savings in buildings. So if you have a space that is typically occupied by large volumes of persons, say a meeting room or a conference room, or even a lecture hall, you want to have an increased ventilation rate when it's occupied. But when it's not occupied, you want to make sure that you're cutting down the amount of outdoor air coming in, which saves on energy and reduces your potential for high humidity. So, but if you're worried about the COVID-19, you want to make sure you have a fixed ventilation rate and fixed dilution in that space. The cons obviously are increased energy consumption and the loss of the operational efficiency that the system was designed to provide. Again, you may want to consider the energy recovery ventilators as an option for regaining some of the efficiency that you were losing. And this is a typical energy recovery ventilators. Some of them can be external, sit on the roof. some of them can sit in your ceiling void. So they are fairly flexible in terms of the options that you have relative to the systems that you have installed. Consider running your systems 24/7 to increase the impact of the other measures. The pros are the continuous dilution of the air and entrainment of contaminants in the filters, and maintains the system at or close to the desired environmental conditions at all times. The cons are obviously increased energy consumption and the potential for elevated relative humidity readings during reduced occupancy conditions or overcast conditions and at night. So you have, if you're going to run your system 24/7, you have to take steps to control the environmental conditions, primarily humidity control. You can use electric duct heaters, or you control the blower motor speed, which also allows the system to remove more moisture by passing air over the coil less quickly. Consider the installation of portable dehumidifiers. That's good for spaces where you have mini split systems or VRF units. Consider dedicated outdoor air systems for outdoor air supply, energy recovery ventilators again, and of course, if you're going to be running your system over longer periods, you want to increase your maintenance regimen. A fairly easy approach is to use portable HEPA filters. You see them quite often in offices where there are localized complaints of indoor air quality. People have ionizers and filters and what have you. They're easy to buy off the shelf and install. And obviously with COVID coming now, the manufacturers of now supplying them with UV radiation and odor absorption capabilities. For facilities management personnel, it's provides a visual indicator to the occupants that you're actually doing something. It's one thing to tell the staff or the occupants that you are consulting with the engineers and we're doing this and we're doing that and the next. Unless they actually see something being done, it's difficult to convince them that things are getting better. So the HEPA filters sitting on the floor tend to be a nice reminder or proof that you're actually doing something. The cons are they tend to protect a relatively small area. If you have a large open office, you need to have multiple units. Enclosed offices, limited area in the cubicles, and a potential for noise pollution. If you're running them full speed to achieve maximum efficiency, you may start to get complaints from the person sitting closest to them. Again, we would recommend consulting your HVAC professional about the correct filter to use for your setting, and consider their deployment in offices or small spaces where persons may congregate, like waiting rooms and lunchrooms, etc. The unit on the left, you see the little blue light, which is the UV radiation that is built in. And this is just your standard HEPA filter. These are portable, usually compact, and can be placed pretty much anywhere that a copy machine would normally be standing. The ultraviolet germicidal irradiation is a bit more complex, but it has proven to be very effective against the SARS-CoV virus. They say that UV light from the sun kills the virus. Maybe that's why we're not having such a hard time down in the Caribbean. And you have options on how you can deploy it. You can deploy it within the air handling unit, and it will reduce the level of viable virus particles being recirculated in your air conditioning system. And you can also deploy it within the occupied space above the occupied zone, treating the air before it's recirculated. So the benefit there is that as the droplets are breathed out, the UV is impacting them and reducing the risk of spread. There is a risk of irradiation of the occupants or the service personnel, and so that has to be taken into consideration when deciding what type of UV GI you're going to install. So consult your HVAC professional based on which system to use based on your HVAC system, your space usage, and occupancy levels. Consider its installation in areas where high-risk people congregate. So medical waiting rooms would be an example of where you might want to consider it to protect not only your patients, but your staff who have to face them on a daily basis. So on the left, you'll see a UVGI unit that can be installed in a space. It's at high level, so it doesn't shine at or on the persons in the room. And on the right is a UV irradiation on the air handling unit coil. So that when you have a central air conditioning unit, it will treat all the air that's passing through it, and it keeps the coil clean as well. We do actually have a seminar that we've invited you to on Monday, where we will be looking at UVC radiation technologies and the best practices for applying them. So you're all welcome to see that, to attend that. So in summary, the guidelines that we have just discussed assume the best engineering practices are being observed in terms of design, installation, operation, and maintenance of the HVAC systems in your building. If you're not properly maintaining your system, you can't expect it to work optimally all the time, and you are putting the occupants at risk. And I'm sure you're all very, very familiar with the important level of importance that's put on facilities management by those who make the decisions up top. I think the COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated that we need to be very focused on what we do in our buildings and how we maintain our systems. But the status quo is no longer acceptable in our view. So the key takeaways, the provision of a safe working environment for employees must now become the focus of senior management, HR, and facilities management. Systems need to be properly designed, configured, installed, and maintained. I implore you to consult your HVAC professional. Continuous monitoring of the system is required to maintain optimal performance and employee safety. We call this monitoring-based commissioning, where you use sensors to actively and proactively report to you what's going on so that you can nip issues in the bud before they become life-threatening or injurious to your occupants. Obviously, all the recommendations that we've given will require increased CapEx operational and maintenance budgets, but that will be the requirement to achieve minimal acceptable standards going forward in a COVID-19 environment. These are the references used in this presentation. Again, these are all available on the ASHRAE website on that link that I shared with you. Edward, Giselle, I'm going to hand over to you for questions.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to unmute Giselle here. Trying to unmute Giselle. Unmute Giselle. Hold on a second. Unmute Giselle. Giselle, I'm unmuting you, but it's not unmuting. So I don't know if you can also unmute. Not sure. Anyway, all right, thank you very much, George. That was very, very enlightening. I have one question from the chat so far, which asks, I noticed only UV was mentioned as a control measure. This is from Wendell Robinson. Can some light be shed on bipolar ionization?
Yeah, there are, ionization is one option you can use. It relies, however, on the particles being, and the airflow being slow enough for the particles to be trapped.
Right.
One thing that ionization does is it builds up a film of the contaminant on the coil or on whatever it is, whatever the medium is. it still requires maintenance, and you have to be very careful again how you are deploying those. So by no means is UV the only technology you can deploy. There are a myriad of technologies out there. I think plasma ionization is another option. Again, all of this is available in great detail on the COVID-19 website that ASHRAE set up.
Okay, any other questions, folks? Darren, not joining. No. Any other questions? I am not seeing other questions. I can also unmute everybody. I'm hesitant to unmute everybody because we get a lot of feedback. But if anybody wants to ask a question, I've released the mutes on the control. So if you want to ask a question directly, you can unmute your own mic and ask directly on the webinar. Any questions? No questions? So when I have a bit of a question, George. So you talk about ionization and you talk about the buildup. When you mean ionization, do you refer specifically to a corona discharge?
No. So the way ionization works is that it electrically charges whatever particles are passing through it. Right. And that electrical charge causes the particle to be attracted to the surface of the device.
Right. What about ozonating? I know ozonators are used sometimes to remove scents, but it's very dangerous for people during occupancy. So I know I've heard some talk about ozonators.
Yeah. I haven't heard about ozonators being used to combat COVID-19. Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right. So Simon Wiltshire asks, should the WHO declare that COVID is airborne? How would your recommendations for the built environment change? He's saying if they were to declare it as airborne, how would your recommendations for the built environment change?
Well, the recommendations are assuming that there is some potential for the virus to become airborne in an indoor environment. So that it does not change. And in fact, what ASHRAE was saying in April was that there is sufficient evidence to suggest that it can be airborne in an indoor environment. So the recommendations are geared towards dealing with it as an airborne virus.
Right.
One thing that, from a facilities management perspective, that I want people to be aware of is that in offices and spaces that have carpets, if we are dealing with a droplet type of transmission, those droplets will fall to the floor. That's why they were saying stay 6 feet apart and wear your mask. If you are going into that working environment and you're not wearing your mask, you are COVID positive and you are producing droplets that have the virus on them and they do fall to the floor, they will eventually dry out on the floor. And when your cleaners come to vacuum, if they're not using the correct equipment with the necessary filtration, what happens is that they will then resuspend those particles into the atmosphere. So it is not simply a question of what you're producing. It is a question of how you're cleaning.
Right.
And I get very concerned normally when I see carpets in offices and people complaining about indoor air quality. First thing I go and do is look in the janitor's closet to see what vacuum cleaners they're using. With COVID-19, that risk becomes even more elevated because you can, with the incorrect equipment or techniques, resuspend those particles and make it create a risk for persons. And those persons could be the very same cleaners themselves.
That is very interesting. Somebody has mentioned that has very good information. I think a lot of people overlook that. I think also when people are doing deep cleaning or disinfection, they're coming in and laying down disinfection on the carpets and then steaming them and then drying them out. So I suppose you have to actually kill the COVID in the carpet, or try to kill it in the carpet before taking it out.
Yes. So, and you know, a good shampoo may do a better job than pouring the disinfectant on it.
Yeah, yeah.
So you want to look at your cleaning regimen. The other thing regarding cleaning, where they're suggesting that you need to clean more regularly and wipe down the surfaces 2 or 3 times a day.
Yeah.
Research has demonstrated that some cleaning products, when used regularly, can have the effect on the lungs of smoking 20 packs a week. So, you know, a lot of those chemicals are extremely harsh. If you know, we've had people, indoor air quality specialists, relate stories of janitorial staff mixing them together so they get a nice smell.
Yeah.
With pretty bad results.
Right.
So you need to be careful in terms of your increased cleaning, what chemicals you are using and putting into the atmosphere in the office environment. VOCs are, you know, they are a concern. And if you're adding more cleaning chemicals in there, you may be exacerbating the situation, dealing with the COVID, but causing other health issues.
Okay, I have 3 more questions at the moment. One is from Brad. Brad asks, for hospital and other containment-sensitive environments, should the MERV filter rating be increased even further, like more than a 13? Or is 13 recommended and that's
13 is what's recommended by ASHRAE, but in terms of the type of filter you're using, you would use more sophisticated filters in a hospital environment, and you probably will use other technologies as well. The UV at the air handling unit, you're more likely to have a central air handling unit in a hospital than you would in an office environment. So the hospitals would tend to have more advanced equipment, but again, they are dealing with persons walking in potentially sick all the time. So a localized treatment and ventilation of the space before they are mixing with the general hospital population is the way that you'd want to go. So the UV irradiation at high level in a hospital waiting room, HEPA filters in your patient rooms, localized treatment of the potential COVID virus spread is going to be the way that you would prevent a spread in a hospital versus simply looking at your central station air handling unit. Okay.
I now have a question from Keith asking about if you have any recommendations or specifications for vacuum cleaners, in as much as we talked about vacuum cleaners.
Yeah, so there you can get industrial, commercial vacuum cleaners with HEPA filters. Now, obviously a HEPA filter on a vacuum cleaner is not going to be 100%, but I've seen a lot of persons using these shark type Dyson vacuum cleaners with a tornado to do commercial cleaning. They are just blowing air straight back out, and they don't have, well, if they do have filtration, you have to ask what level of filtration they have and how often that person is cleaning or changing that filter.
Right. Okay, and then we have Sandra. I'm trying to keep up. From Sandra, there has been discussion about opening windows and turning off AC in modern buildings. The windows are simply decorative. What are the least expensive ways of managing this? I think you talked about this a little bit actually.
Yes. So we definitely do not recommend opening windows and turning off the AC. if you have a modern office building would not normally be built for natural ventilation, cross ventilation. So you may have the person sitting next to the window feeling like everything is fine and dandy, but the persons inside are going to be subject to increased heat, humidity, thermal stress, which can cause other issues. And you have no way of controlling the ventilation in that building.
Right.
So this is why we are recommending that you look at ways of increasing that ventilation, increasing the air change rate. For a medical facility, you're looking at 28 changes an hour. So the air is changed every 3 minutes. Obviously in a normal office setting, that is not feasible, but you want to reduce your occupancy. So if you normally have 100 people in there, you may go to 50 people. The system may have been set up to provide 15 CFM per person. Now you get up to 30 CFM per person without actually changing the heat load on your system. If you can increase it a little bit more to provide more ventilation per person, dilution per person, they call it.
Right.
Then you are achieving that without doing a major change to your system. But it is not a straightforward exercise. None of the recommendations are straightforward. That's why we recommend speaking to an HVAC professional to see what your system is designed to handle before you do anything. But increasing the ventilation rate is one of the easiest ways to go about it.
Okay. So Ted asked a very difficult question. I'm not sure if we can answer it. About how do you monitor the effectiveness of implementing your recommendations made? So if you put in place the UV filter, UV light and filters, etc., how do we monitor that? We probably have to do a quality test.
Yeah, so that comes to the point where we spoke about monitoring-based commissioning. So what monitoring-based commissioning is typically done with a retrofit or a new building, a new installation. You leverage sensors that will give you the information you're looking for. So in this case, it may be CO2 levels or VOCs or contaminants that are passing through your filters or your return duct. So you have sensors that are continuously reporting, maybe once every hour, what the conditions are within the building. What that allows you to do is to react if there's any change. Typically, when you install a system, you let it run for a month or so or 2 months. The system performance is gradually dropping all the time. And then you get your maintenance guy in and he brings it back up to the level it was when he started it. So you get a very deep, what you call sawtooth pattern in terms of the performance of the system.
Right.
A monitoring-based commissioning would allow you to nip that change in the bud very early, get the adjustment made, the changes made, the filters changed, the system gassed back up, so it's operating optimally, at least 90% of the time, as opposed to operating suboptimally 60% of the time. In an environment where you are trying to protect your staff against potential risk of infection, the operation and functionality and efficiency of your air conditioning and ventilation system is key, absolutely key. And this is why we're saying that you cannot simply, it's no longer a function simply of facilities management. There needs to be buy-in and input from top management, from HR, from facilities management, that we are going to invest in and maintain the systems at optimal operational levels to protect our staff.
So the next one is, hold on, very easy, just lose my place. Wendell is asking, I see Brad has his hand raised. We'll get to you, Brad, in a couple of minutes. Wendell is asking about all the publicity that's happened about 6 foot spacing, etc., like that and stuff, but not much publicity has been done about this mode of transmission, and basically asking why. I'm not sure if this is if we can answer that in this forum, but if you want to give it a shot, Nick, George.
I can, and I sort of alluded to it in the start of the presentation. It is a new virus. It's only 6-7 months old. We don't know enough about it to quantitatively say the airborne transmission under all circumstances
Right.
is a vector. What the scientists that petitioned the World Health Organization were saying is that there's sufficient evidence that under certain circumstances it can be airborne. It is not proven to be as much of a risk in an outdoor environment where you are standing further away from somebody, where there's good ventilation and there's strong sunlight. If it was a true airborne virus, that all of those things would not matter. It would be transmitted as readily as I breathe in one location and the person downwind from me gets it. What they're saying is that under certain circumstances, it can be transmitted through an airborne vector. So if you go into a nightclub, which is typically air conditioned and it's loud, so people are speaking loudly or shouting at one another or singing, they are projecting the droplets from their mouths further than they would during normal speech. It's also an environment where you have a mass of people all speaking at the same time, all inhaling, and you will probably have fans and air conditioners blowing around the place. So in those environments, you can have more than just droplets. You can have droplet nuclei that can get around and start to affect people. The advice from the World Health Organization was very much focused on droplet transmission and contact transmission. Imagine if they'd come out and said in January, we have an airborne virus, and if you breathe on people, you're going to catch it. Without having the evidence, that would have created mass hysteria, and we would still be in lockdown, basically. But ASHRAE and the scientists are saying that you cannot discount it because there are conditions where it can become transmitted through an airborne vector. And what the recommendations that ASHRAE has put out are seeking to do is to ensure that your environment can achieve and can be maintained at a state where it reduces the risk. You still have to wear your mask. You still have to exercise all the protocols that your local authorities are saying that you should, but we're looking to minimize the risk by implementing these various changes.
All right, we probably have time for a couple more. I have two short ones, so I'll ask both at the same time. Richard is asking for buildings that are designed with limited fresh air, don't have the modern fresh air intakes for purging air. Would you recommend an air purge for such a building?
So the energy recovery ventilator is probably the best bet there. Most of those offices would have a lunchroom, a washroom, an area where you have copiers or printers. All of those are opportunities to exhaust air from the building. And if they are connected to a conditioned space, you can leverage the conditioned air that's being exhausted through them to temper your incoming air so that you're not putting a heavy load on your building. So the energy recovery ventilator will filter the air and it will cool it to some extent, maybe to room temperature or just above room temperature. So you don't feel it coming in, and it doesn't impact your overall heat load, or it doesn't impact it very much.
Right. And then the next question was, air condition service technicians who going into the air handler, which may have COVIDs in it, what type of mask, if not a cloth mask, what type of mask is recommended? I suppose an N95 might be.
Yeah, we have been fairly fortunate in the Caribbean not to have a prevalence of community spread, but it is something that needs to be considered. When you're going into those coils and into those air handling units, you are going into the belly of the beast, basically. That's where all the action is. If the filter has done its job, if the air conditioning system has done its job, those filters can potentially be laden with the virus, an unviable virus. So the techniques for safe removal would probably include some level of PPE. May not be your hazmat suit, but certainly you want to protect yourself and your clothing and your face. And probably bag those filters before they go too far, so you're not walking through the space with a filter and dropping particles all over the place. Once that air handling unit turns off, there's a risk that anything that's lodged in that filter can be shaken off and go into drop onto the floor and then be sucked up into the unit when it's turned back on. So an elevated awareness of what you're doing when you go and service those units is definitely required. And when we do have eventually the community spread.
We when this thing first started, we trained some of our staff in terms of proper hazmat suit and protocols of how to wear the equipment, the PPE, how to take it off, how to don it, how to doff it, what to use when, etc. And we did that more for the sanitation and disinfection side. But clearly, if we get threats, if we get suspicions like Republic Bank today and Pennywise yesterday and SCB, and I'm saying that without knowing for sure because I haven't watched the news. But for those buildings, going in now to do a HVAC service, then they probably should be trained to do in the same way. I think us saying wear a PPE is good, but people can wear PPE and then contaminate themselves when they take the PPE off.
Yeah, so just about to state that the biggest risk is when you're doffing and taking off your PPE.
Yeah.
The technique for doing that is very very specific.
Yeah.
It is best if you have a companion to assist you in donning and doffing. One of the cases of Ebola transmission to an American was actually when she was taking off her PPE.
Right.
She came into contact with it and unknowingly infected herself.
Yeah.
So if we are dealing with a suspected COVID-19 building, that has to apply. But the point of the matter is that any building you walk into could have COVID-19 in it.
Yeah.
And the risks do exist. They are real, and they need to be dealt with. It may be an issue of before you go into the air handling unit, you have to have a UV wand that you apply to the filter prior to taking it out.
Yes.
So there are a number of steps that can be taken.
Yeah.
The ASHRAE website, COVID-19 website page has step-by-step instructions for building operators, cautions, and a lot of information there. That is far too much to include in this presentation, but I would encourage you to all go there. Giselle has my contact information, and there are HVAC professionals in Trinidad and around the Caribbean that I'm sure will be willing to offer input and advice into the best steps to take. And again, we have the support of ASHRAE. Any resources that you want to have access to, we can provide them.
So that actually segues right into the last point, which was not so much a question, but more of an exclamation from Marissa, where she says, so Jim's, given he talked about places with loud noises and people talking hard and breathing hard, the risk going up quite a lot. She's saying based on that, gyms really should be operating, shouldn't they? More of a statement than a question.
Pretty much. I mean, if they're telling you don't congregate at a bar,
Yeah.
you know, you're not going to give a man or a lady a tip when they're doing bench presses and breathing in your face, right? So it does become a high risk environment, and people are in there grunting and screaming and shouting, and you know, imagine an aerobics class, you know, two people in the class.
Yeah.
Good luck getting 6 feet separation there, you know.
Yeah, I tell you what. All right. Well, I think that brings us to the end. It's good timing because it's just a little over an hour that we've been on, and I think we've learned a lot. I've learned a lot, for sure, and I hope everybody has learned a lot. And we have had 47 or 48 people here on the recording.
That's
so
great.
I want to ask Giselle, sorry, will you give us a little vote of thanks and close us off?
That's a yes. Hi, good evening, everyone. Again, of course, George, on behalf of the Trinidad and Tobago chapter of IFME, we really want to thank you for your time, because we know, especially around these times, you can imagine how busy you must be in terms of helping persons out all these fires and figure things out. So we really, really appreciated what you were able to share in a very clear way. And it's also very good in terms of follow-ups, you know, for our members as well as all the guests we have here, to be able to hear it from, to me, a very tried and true source, you know, in terms of all these things we hear, you know, going through emotions. Even as professionals, you know, we do hear a lot of things that are not correct. So it's very good that we hope persons would listen and would use the information provided here today to not panic, but to use the science of it to help fight against this, you know, a virus that we really don't know much about, you know, but at least as the information gets out to everyone, at least we are armed with these tools to move forward. And I think they're basically just best practices regardless, that we could take away in terms of our everyday as facility managers. So thank you once again. And I must say thank you as well to Kieran, who was very instrumental in terms of making the connection. I know Kieran very well from another organization. So it's very good that we could have connected with TTIFMA and ASHRAE on this level. So thank you very much. And to everyone who was here with us and stayed on and asked questions, thank you. And we look forward to being able to connect maybe for our next meeting. We tend to have monthly meetings, and of course we're using the Zoom platform like most people. And it's really working out well, I would say, in terms of the reach and feedback and connectivity. So thank you, everyone. And
our next meeting, for those who might be interested, is the topic is going to be waste management techniques, and we have a waste management expert joining us, and she's particularly interested in industrial level composters and composting biological waste, vegetable waste. So we think we're very excited to hear about her. It's not particularly COVID related, but it's very interesting nonetheless. We still have to learn about other things. So that's going to be in August, and look out for the same channels that you picked up this information on, whether it be Facebook or LinkedIn or email. Look out for notification for about that topic, and sign up to IFMA. I'm going to make the same spiel that ASHRAE did. Sign up to IFMA and become a member, and join our fraternity. Okay, thanks a lot.
I thank you for the opportunity, and I encourage you, the ones who wanted to find out about UVC, to attend our seminar on Monday night, 7:30. And we look forward to assisting in any way that we can in the future. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, George. Most appreciated.
Not at all. Take care.
Have a good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah, you don't know. You don't know. You need to forget what you think I'm doing.
Already forgotten. I'm so sorry about that. I just want to borrow your phone. Can I please make a call on your phone? I'm sure it's still.
Bam, bam, bam. And signing off.
Please, I'm not what you think I am. I swear. I'm a good girl.
Christelle, as we have you here, Christelle,
For what? Being a good girl.
how you doing?
Okay. You want to chat while we have all the participants still here?
Edward.
Hi, Jenny.
Hi, but could you stop recording then?
Shucks, that's a good idea.